For months now, the question hasn't been if Attorney General Andrew Cuomo will run for governor, but rather when he will finally make his campaign official. Today, we got our first real glimpse at the presumptive candidate's timeline. As you know, Cuomo made political waves last week when he slapped Senate Majority Leader Pedro Espada with a civil suit, accusing him of stealing $14 million from his Bronx nonprofit Soundview Healthcare Network. Espada insists the investigation is political payback for his role in the Senate coup. And while that seems a stretch to many, there is something to be said for the idea that Cuomo might be trying to put his major investigations to bed before launching his gubernatorial run. As it turns out, that might be easier said than done. According to well-placed sources, Cuomo was planning to launch his campaign this week, timing the rollout just before the Democratic Rural Conference straw poll this weekend in Niagara Falls. But the fallout from the Espada investigation seems to have thrown a wrench into Cuomo's works. Now we're told Cuomo is pushing the announcement back several weeks, with plans to launch his candidacy just a few days before the state Democratic convention in Rye, and that begins on May 26th. My first guest tonight is New York City's public advocate, a veteran of the state's political scene and an ally of the Cuomo family. Bill de Blasio joins us tonight from New York City to offer some perspective on the political strategy at play here. Thanks for your time tonight, Bill.
My pleasure, Liz.
So, just very briefly, we should probably explain to the viewers upstate what the public advocate is, because we have no statewide corollary. There's no person who does what you do.
Right. Well, public advocate is one of 3 citywide offices here in the city, representing all 8.4 million New York City residents. It's a check and balance office, check and balance on the mayor, a watchdog office. You know, there's some similarities to what an attorney general does at the state level in terms of being that watchdog to make sure government's working for people. And like a lieutenant governor, a public advocate is next in line of succession should the mayor ever be unable to continue to serve. Okay.
And you are in Albany actually for your first official lobbying gig as public advocate since your election, and you took office in January. And you're lobbying actually on an interesting thing, which is a state law that requires cities to charge homeless people to stay in shelters if those people have jobs and make over a certain amount. Except New York City is the only city that's actually enforcing that law.
Well, first of all, it's a lobbying visit. I think gig is for the professionals. I'm a public servant.
Excuse me, sorry. You're not getting paid for this, technically speaking.
Not getting paid.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Paid by the people to represent their interests. Look, this policy, Liz, is outlandish. A state law that was unenforced for years says that localities that have homeless shelters should charge rent to the clients over a certain income level. Because a lot of homeless people still maintain part-time income or minimum wage income, but not enough to survive, bluntly. This law was not enforced for years. The Bloomberg administration decided to start enforcing it. A lot of us said it was absolutely counterproductive in the middle of an economic crisis to do that. We actually wanted to help people get back out of shelter, help them establish savings accounts or some mechanism to use the money they earned to help them back out to the private housing market. Well, you know, the Bloomberg administration, in my view, has made a huge mistake here. And what I'm going to Albany to talk about is the whole notion that the state assembly, the state senate are looking to pass a law that would authorize these savings accounts as an alternative to homeless people paying rent and then never seeing the money again.
So in terms of housing, which is actually a nice segue, so thanks very much, but also a specialty of yours for some time and also of Andrew Cuomo's, you worked for the current Attorney General when he was the U.S. Housing Secretary in the Clinton administration.
That's right. I was his New York and New Jersey regional director.
So at this point, we're all sort of waiting for him to announce that he's going to run for governor, and he's not been all that present in terms publicly. I mean, he has a very large footprint as AG, but he's not giving a lot of interviews, and so I think a lot of people don't really know who he is. So what kind of manager was he when he was at HUD?
A real hands-on manager. I mean, this is what was so amazing to me when I first took the job at HUD. I didn't know what to expect, and I found a guy who was interested in every detail of the work, who had really mastered the subject matter. You know, he really cut his teeth fighting homelessness here in New York City. And so he knew that part of the housing and economic development world, but he had to learn a whole host of other issues when he became HUD secretary. He had to manage the relationship with the Congress. He had to know what was going on all over the country. Very hands-on, very inquisitive, very policy-focused. Now, a hard-charging guy, no question about it, and he wanted results, and if you didn't provide results, you got to hear about it. Just like a good manager of a baseball team will tell his hitters that are not hitting, But I found him to be a very engaging boss because he knew the subject matter.
So that's interesting that you say hard charging, because hard charging is probably. That's a very positive thing to say. The flip side of that, in terms of his reputation, is aggressive, highly ambitious, cutthroat, etc. He argued to me in 2006, when he came back from sort of this disastrous run that he made for governor in 2002 against Carl McCall, then he went through a difficult divorce, that he had changed, that had given him perspective, that he had perhaps not, it's not a metamorphosis, but it enabled him to temper himself, and he learned more, maybe more about patience, for example. Do you think that's true?
Yes, it gave him a lot of perspective. I mean, that was a very, very tough time for him. I was deeply involved in the 2002 governor's race. It really never worked from the start. What he went through personally was really quite tough, quite public. I think he gained a lot of perspective. And look, the hard-charging part you wouldn't want to get rid of. You want an aggressive leader. To clean up Albany right now, to deal with our economic crisis, you have to have an assertive leader. So I'm glad he's built that way. But he did gain perspective. He gained the ability to listen more intently. And I find him to be a very balanced leader at this point. He will be unquestionably hands-on. One thing you will never see, and I think it's fair to say in some of the previous administrations you saw a rather hands-off kind of nonchalant approach to governance. You'll never see that with Andrew Cuomo. He is very focused on the details of governing. Okay, well, that can probably cut both ways too, right? So it'll be interesting to see, and also when he finally launches a campaign, how hands-on he is in terms of managing himself. He has this reputation for doing that, and he's certainly in touch in an off-the-record way with a lot of reporters. Interestingly also, there have been charges by Carl Palladino and some other opponents of his that he had in some way had a responsibility for having a hand in the subprime mortgage crisis when he pushed subprime mortgages as a good thing at HUD at the time. Do you believe that criticism? I mean, can you address that? It's outlandish to begin with. It's absolutely unfactual, but Carl Palladino should hardly talk, considering some of what we've learned about him recently and some of what he thinks is acceptable public discourse. Look, Andrew Cuomo came into a HUD that was profoundly broken. In fact, it was this close to being abolished as an agency by the then Republican Congress. He had to reform it from the foundation, and he did. He turned the place upside down. He professionalized it. He made it a modern agency that could be effective. Clearly, the Clinton administration focused on home ownership, and I think it was part of what Bill Clinton always talked about, was the notion of helping people into the middle class and creating opportunities. So HUD was a part of that. But that cannot be confused with what the private sector did to manipulate people in the subprime dynamic and to manipulate through, predatory practices some folks who obviously should not have been trying to buy a home or should not have been signing a mortgage. These are like apples and oranges here. Andrew Cuomo, in essence, made HUD a much better agency and got a lot done for a lot of people in need. But Palladino's way, way off base. Okay, and I only have time for one more question, and I'm going to turn it back to you in your future. There are a lot of people watching tonight, but none of them probably are from New York City. I think all the weekend people have safely gone home. So now is your opportunity to break some news with me, Bill de Blasio, and tell us that you're going to run for mayor in 2013. Liz, last time I checked is 2010. I'll be happy to talk about the future in a few years. But right now, it's just be the best public advocate I can be. Yeah, you can't fault me for trying. Thanks very much, Bill de Blasio, New York City public advocate. He's joining me tonight from New York City. He'll be in Albany this evening and tomorrow for lobbying. Thanks very much. Thanks, Liz. Thank you.